Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Tonight's video features truly horrifying stalker stories. Story number 1. Teresa Saldana and Richard Jackson. In the late 1970s and 80s, movie starlet Brooklyn native, 27-year-old Teresa Saldana captivated and gained the obsession of Scottish drifter, 47-year-old Arthur Richard Jackson. So much so that he moved to the United States to be closer to her in 1982. It was his fantasy, his dream, and his plan to not only find her, but also kill her, and to die himself by execution so they could be eternally together in the afterlife. Once in the United States, Jackson hired a private investigator to obtain whatever info he could on Saldana. He was able to gain access to her mother's private telephone number and called impersonating a representative for Martin Scorsese. Jackson claimed he needed to reach Teresa to discuss a possible film role. Saldana's mother provided him with her residential address, and there he waited outside for the West Hollywood actress. As she exited her home in broad daylight, he attacked her, stabbing her 10 times with a hunting knife in the torso, inches within her life. It is said that he did so with such fury, such power, that the knife he used became bent. A delivery man ran out of an apartment building past several onlookers, rushed to the actress' side and subdued Jackson, saving her life. Jackson was convicted of attempted murder and given a 12-year sentence. While in prison, he continued to make threats against Saldana and began to also direct them at the man who saved her. Sending her letter after letter, the actress lived in fear for her life. He would write that if it wasn't him, he had friends that could kill her, and that upon his release he promised he would find her and finish what he started. She suffered from anxiety and insomnia, and was even hospitalized for the trauma she endured and the ongoing harassment. Jackson was later extradited to the UK for an unrelated crime, and later died there in 2004 at the age of 68. Saldana later played herself in a movie, Victims for Victims, the Teresa Saldana story, in 1984, telling her story, and wrote a book, Beyond Survival, detailing the events and her struggles after her attack in 1987. She passed away at the age of 61 in June of 2016, but lived after her attack, dedicating herself to fight for privacy and anti-stalking laws, and advocating for victims who shared stories similar to hers. She was the founder of the Victims for Victims organization, which fought for the establishment of anti-stalking laws and advocated for victims' rights. She lobbied for the 1990 anti-stalking law and later went on to support the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. Story number 2. Rebecca Schaefer and Robert John Brotto. A 19-year-old crazed fan was actually inspired by the actions of Arthur Richard Jackson when he became obsessed with 21-year-old actress Rebecca Schaefer. He hired a private investigator to obtain information on the actress, like Jackson did with Saldana, before committing murder. The Tucson, Arizona resident had an elaborate shrine of the actress in his home and wrote her numerous letters. He traveled to Los Angeles in 1987 and made multiple attempts to visit her on the set of her sitcom, My Sister Sam. He was turned away more than once by security while trying to gain access to Rebecca. In 1989, after watching a movie in which Rebecca Schaefer was involved in a sex scene, he became angered, enraged, jealous, and disappointed. He decided that she needed to be punished and called her another Hollywood whore. He traveled to Los Angeles and, upon hiring a private investigator, obtained her address. It was as simple and as easy as a mere $250 to a PI. He buzzed Rebecca's apartment. She answered, and he told her how he was her biggest fan and even showed her an autograph of hers that he had. She politely asked him to leave and not come back to her private home again. Shortly after, he returned, buzzed her door again, and this time when she answered, he pulled out a gun from a brown paper bag and shot her to death in the chest. He was later arrested and confessed to the murder, receiving life in prison without the possibility of parole. The actress's rising career in life had been cut short, thanks to another man being able and willing to pay for information that should have never been accessible to him or anyone else. This case led to the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which actress Teresa Saldana also lobbied for. Since both private investigators had gotten a hold of their addresses through the DMV, it was made illegal for anyone to obtain private information on an individual through the DMV. Story number 3. Laura Black and Richard Farley. This case of stalking ended in mass murder. Richard Farley, age 35, an electrical engineer for Electromagnetic System Labs Incorporated in Sunnyvale, California, became instantly obsessed with 22-year-old Laura Black when she was hired in April 1984. According to him, it was love at first sight. He would repeatedly ask her out despite her rejections and would continually buy her gifts and write her love letters. He told her he would continue to ask her out until she accepted or until the day he died. The letters, the gifts, and the advances continued. He also adopted a habit of following her around in his car and showing up at her home. She was forced to move several times because of his ongoing stalking and harassment. He went as far as going through her personnel files under false pretenses and befriending the custodial staff to make copies of her keys for her desk and files at work. Over these 4 years, she had received 200 letters from Farley. The stalking and the showing up at places she frequented reached an unsettling point. She went to Human Resources to file a complaint against Farley. He was ordered to not only stay away from Laura, but to also attend counseling sessions. The disturbing obsession and stalking did not stop, and he continued terrorizing Laura Black with increasing, threatening behavior. He was fired from ESL by summer of 1986, but his stalking and obsession continued. In February of 1988, Laura filed a temporary restraining order against Farley. The day before the hearing was scheduled, Farley arrived at ESL armed with a shotgun after purchasing several different guns and a few thousand rounds of ammunition. He shot his first victim in the parking lot and entered the building, shooting his way in. He shot several people, killing 7 and injuring others, before arriving at Laura's office. After closing the door on him, he fired through, shooting her in the shoulder and collapsing one of her lungs. During a 5-hour standoff he had with police, victims hid from Farley, and Laura regained consciousness and was able to prevent the bleeding and survived after being rescued. Farley was found guilty on 7 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. While in prison, he wrote to Laura one final time. He currently sits on death row in San Quentin. Story number 4. Laurie Sho and Lisa Michelle Lambert. Typically, when we think about the word stalking, what comes to mind is a deranged man obsessed with a woman, intimidating her and terrorizing her life. In 1991, Lisa Michelle Lambert shocked us with her fatal jealousy and obsessive stalking of her high school classmate, 16-year-old Laurie Sho, and forever made us change the way we think about stalking. Sho and Lambert were friends for a brief period of time until Lambert grew unreasonably jealous of Sho for thinking that she was after her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Lawrence Yunkin. Laurie briefly dated Yunkin over the summer he and Lambert were not together, and she ended it after being sexually assaulted by him, and even confided in her mother about the attack. Yunkin and Lisa Michelle Lambert, who became pregnant with his child, got back together shortly after. Sho was interested in Yunkin and wanted nothing to do with him after the attack, but Lambert remained paranoid and jealous of Laurie. She devoted herself to stalking and harassing her. She would show up at her work and verbally assault her, taunt her with unsettling phone calls, threaten her openly in public, sometimes even with death threats and physical violence. Lori's mother, Hazel, attempted to file charges against Lambert, but this did nothing to stop her. On December 21st, 1991, Hazel received a phone call from the school counselor requesting she come to a meeting to discuss Lori. The phone call was a ruse to leave Lori vulnerable and alone, and an impersonation by Lambert. Hazel returned home to discover her daughter agonizing as she bled out. She managed to tell her mother the name of her attacker by murmuring her final words. Michelle did it. She had been stabbed several times and her throat had been slashed. Michelle and accomplice Tabitha Buck were arrested the next day, and so was Youngkin, who took the girls to Lori's home that fateful day. He testified against the girls, stating that Buck slashed the victim's throat after both her and Michelle had stabbed her and collapsed one of her lungs. He received a lesser sentence for his testimony. Lambert and Buck both received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Story number 5. Randy Barber and Gary Della Penta. Gary Della Penta became besotted with young woman Randy Barber in California in 1996. After meeting her through a friend, he was relentless in asking her out, sending her gifts and trying to win her over. Della Penta went as far as joining her church. The harassment reached a point so disturbing that Barber, who always rebuffed his advances, went to officials of their church to voice her concerns and express the threat she felt she was being exposed to. Della Penta was banned from congregation. For nearly 3 years, his attraction surpassed obsession as he spent his time stalking Barber and following her everywhere she went. He even took it upon himself to place ads in her home and various sex-related chat rooms. While impersonating her, he described a fetish for rape scenes and fantasies about being raped by strange men who entered her apartment. Della Penta included the woman's address in these ads. He created a fake email address using Barber's name for contact with any men responding to the ad. He even provided instructions on how to break into her home and disarm her security system. As he still spent his time stalking Randy, he would give details on her schedule and social plans. Randy Barber received numerous unsettling and obscene phone calls regarding these ads, many with dirty solicitations. At least 6 men showed up to her private home during a 5-month period, claiming to be there to fulfill her fantasy. She eventually resorted to placing notes on her door, saying the ads were false to turn men away. Della Penta went as far as putting a disclaimer on the ads he posted, stating that the notes were actually fake and all part of the fantasy. After handing Della Penta's name and suspicion to authorities, it wasn't long before his identity was confirmed through search warrants to internet companies. It was verified not only that all emails came from Della Penta's computer after going through his hard drive. He was arrested on charges of cyberstalking, a law that had just gone into effect a mere 3 weeks prior, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. In 1999, he became the first person to be charged under this new statute. Story number 6. Maria Marchese. A woman should always be heard, always be seen, and always believed after experiencing any kind of sexual assault. Trampling and tainting over the stories of and disrespecting rape and sexual assault survivors, Maria Marchese falsely cried rape while embarking on a 4-year terror campaign against psychiatrist Dr. Jan Falkowski in London in early 2000s. Marchese became infatuated with the doctor after meeting him in 2001 while he treated her then partner. She shortly after got a hold of his cell phone number and his home and work phone numbers. She began stalking him, calling him, writing him letters, and sending him messages. She would confess her undying love for him and claim that they were born for each other and meant to be together. Convinced Deborah Pemberton, Falkowski's fiancée, was trying to come between them and ruin their happiness, she began terrorizing her. She would prey on the couple through texts, emails, and phone calls, and spy on them. Many included death threats to Pemberton and sometimes to Falkowski himself. Their wedding was even called off in 2003 after she threatened to burn Pemberton in her wedding dress and suggesting she die while writing in one message, "A gunman has been paid." She broke into the doctor's home several times, one time attempting to cause an explosion by opening up all the gas taps. The harassment was so disturbing and so unsettling that Pemberton had a mental breakdown and fell into a deep depression, later ending his relationship with Falkowski. Marchese accused the doctor of rape in 2004 after stealing a condom from his trash can during one of her break-ins and spilling his semen in her panties. Falkowski lived under suspicion for over a year until evidence was obtained to clear his name 5 days before he was due to appear in court. Traces of his new girlfriend's DNA were found in the sample and helped show he'd been framed by Marchese. Marchese had succeeded in breaking the engagement between Pemberton and Falkowski and damaging his name and reputation, hindering his career, but after 18 months his name was finally cleared. In January of 2007, Maria Marchese was sentenced to 9 years in prison for the terror she unleashed on both Falkowski and Pemberton during all those years. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Email your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I'll leave a link to my email in the description box below as well. Follow me on Instagram @sinfulshorror. I post daily true scary stories on there as well. I know you guys will love and enjoy that interaction as well. Till we meet again, stay sinful.